This is the capital of a great subcontinent, the site of 8 other known cities which rose and decayed through the turning pages of India's glorious history. Delhi old and new, a throbbing metropolis from which flows the lifeblood that governs 360 million people, the hub of expanding industry in Republic India of today. Let us first look at Old Delhi and the fabulous Red Fort built by the Mughal Emperor Shah Jahan in 1648. Over the entrance of the inner courtyard, we look down into the gardens of the Emperor's palace. In these beautiful surroundings, Shah Jahan held public audience from his richly jeweled throne under the royal canopy. The Diwani Khas, or Hall of Private Audience, where he settled affairs of state, and during Durbar received homage from his noblemen. This hall once held the famous Peacock Throne, encrusted with emeralds, rubies, diamonds, and sapphires. Under these walls once flowed the river Jamna, but which has changed its course a mile to the east. Looking back from the Red Fort, there stands one of the largest mosques in the world, also built by the same Mughal emperor for his favorite daughter just after the completion of the fort. Here the devotees of Islam gather each Friday at noon for prayers. A busy day for Muslims, it is too for the bazaars and shopkeepers. The Zanana women, although in purdah, come from their dwellings to join in, but keep to themselves on one side. The ear doctors and ever-hopeful beggars are as much part of the scene as the mosque itself. Leaving Old Delhi, of which the Kashmir Gate is one entrance, we go to the center of New Delhi, the modern city planned and realized during the British rule in 1912. An immediate contrast is the impressive India Gate, designed by Sir Edwin Lutyens in 1920 and erected as an epitaph to the men who fell in the First World War. Beside it stands the statue of King George V, the center of well laid out parks and vistas, stretching in all directions and along Kingsway to Government House and the administrative buildings. Near these, on the north side, is the circular council chamber, one of the finest examples of modern architecture in India, and where the present Parliament sits. The north block of the Secretariat houses most of the important civil government offices, whilst those in the south block are occupied by the Defence Headquarters. Crowning all these majestic buildings and set amid spacious gardens and lawns is the President of India's residence, Government House. In the forecourt stands the Jaipur column, topped by the Star of India. Heaven's light, our guide. Sir Edwin Lutyens was again the architect, and the beautifully proportioned rooms are linked with over 6 miles of stairway and corridor. To the rear of the private apartments stretch cool and shady lawns, laid in Mughal style, bordered with luxurious flower beds and herbaceous borders. Fountains mingle their chatter with the birds, and walking down the covered walk into the sunken garden is witnessing a miracle indeed, to see the variety of flowers with their blaze of color growing in this comparatively arid region. New Delhi, thoughtfully planned and laid out, is everywhere symmetrical in design. Connaught Place, the main shopping center, is a large circle of modern shops, restaurants and offices. A Mawari wedding in progress is an everyday sight in the city. Modern, well-appointed hotels are numerous, all conveniently situated to suit the businessman or the tourist. Now, when is the next full moon, you wonder? Or what time will the sun set? Well, maybe you left your almanac at home, but here, in the heart of the new city, is an observatory, as strange as anything from H.G. Wells. Instruments of astronomy, sundials and quadrants, hollow spheres and shadow pins, built in mammoth proportions. But for their unportability, they are as accurate as normal-size precision instruments of today. It was built in 1710 by Maharaja Jai Singh, who was an eminent astrologer in his time, to determine the movement of heavenly bodies. In places of worship, New Delhi, like other cities of India, has many Hindu temples, some ancient and others of modern design. Lakshmi Narayan Temple is one of these and is a fine example of the Light of Asia style of temple.
Jagat-hitayo Krishnayo Govindayo Narayanayo Namo Namo Ja Devi Sarvabhutesu Shaktirupeno Sangasthita.
It blends well with the modern trend of architecture so predominant in New Delhi, like the imposing All India Radio building. Of the many famous landmarks near the capital, perhaps the Qutb Minar is the most interesting and best preserved. Only 12 miles south of the city, it commands a view of the entire capital. Standing 238 feet high, it was begun by Qutbuddin in 1200 and is constructed of sandstone throughout. The 2 top stories were rebuilt by Feroz Shah. Nearby, in the ruin of the courtyard, is the iron pillar, dating back to the 4th century A.D. Local legend defies you to touch fingertips round this pillar, but which, if you succeed, brings luck. This impressive tower, raised to commemorate victory, was also a minaret of a mosque, now derelict, and a similar tower, started but never completed, lies to the north, with only the foundations to show. The carvings round the tower depict passages from the Quran, the holy book of Islam, and in many places, plates of glass are cemented across masonry cracks to check any subsiding in the foundations, which might endanger this lofty edifice. In pleasant gardens kept by the archaeological department, many people picnic and spend a quiet day away from the noise and heat of the city. Humayun's tomb, built in 1565, the first of the big Mughal tombs of which the Taj Mahal at Agra is a later example. Safdarjung, the last of the Mughal tombs, was built in 1753. The Purana Kila, or Old Fort, the foundations of which date back as far as 3000 BC, was built between 1530 and 1550 AD by Sher Shah. The building of one of the earliest of Mughal libraries still remains. Further from the city, and still complete in its ruined entirety, is Tulagabad, one of the ancient walled cities of Delhi. This dome of Mughal style is unique, being topped by a Hindu symbol. You have seen Delhi old and new, the Delhi of marble palaces and famous mosques, walled cities and modern hotels. Now see the pageant of India today, a free republic, a nation of enterprise and vast responsibility in world affairs. In her new glory, India marches for freedom and democracy. On the occasion of the anniversary of India becoming a republic within the British Commonwealth of Nations, a grand march past was held in the capital. Let us follow the President's personal bodyguard from the cavalry lines as they approach Government House to escort the President. Arrayed in their splendid uniforms, their lances carried stiffly by their side, they represent all that is best in this great country. Steeped in tradition and trained to the highest degree of efficiency, they are some of the finest horsemen in the land. The procession, beginning along the impressive vista of King's Way, stretching from Government House to India Gate, continues for 7 miles along the main highways of New Delhi. Crowds gather to suffocating capacity for the best vantage point. Taking the general salute, the massed bands played the Indian national anthem, and 31 guns fired in honor of India's first president. When the President, with the Defense Minister and Chiefs of Staff, had taken their place on the dais, the military procession advanced, led by a mounted band. The Kachua horse, part of the Jaipur State Cavalry, followed by the famous Camel Corps. gallant Sikh regiment. The Gurkhas, who made history in the Burma campaign. The Travancore Light Infantry, the Gwalior Lancers, the Mule Corps, contingent after contingent. A magnificent turnout indeed, not forgetting the young blood of India's Cadet Corps, Territorial Army, and Home Guard. The Indian Navy brought up the rear with the Air Force and Indian Police. Now let us turn back the pages of this ancient civilization and watch its history come to life. Heralded as in days of old, the procession is led by drums on elephant, Tibetan horns, and musicians. A puppet show representing Rajput warriors and court dancers. The national tricolor, the symbol of all that India has fought for and won, the first great epic of India, Rama and Sita being ferried across the river Ganga, the second great epic of India, Lord Krishna, Buddha seated under the Bodhi tree in the 5th century BC, Asoka, the illustrious monarch of the 3rd century BC, sending missionaries of peace and goodwill to Macedonia, Egypt, Ceylon, and Iran. The greatest builder of all time, Shah Jahan, builder of the Red Fort, Jama Masjid, and the Taj Mahal at Agra. Akbar, the Great, the Rani of Jhansi, great woman leader of the War of Independence, 1857. And finally, a tableau representing the message of goodwill and peace of the Indian Republic towards all nations of the world. After the end of the procession, the President returned in state to Government House. In the afternoon, he was at home. To many distinguished guests, the diplomatic corps and members of the public invited for the occasion. He chatted with many visitors, and though a formal gathering, his usual friendliness and amiable manner was well marked. Prime Minister Nehru, wearing the inevitable red rose for a buttonhole, was in great demand by the guests, and many had the privilege of meeting this great statesman. The Commander-in-Chief, Indian Navy, was present, and also the United Kingdom High Commissioner. Before we leave this mighty capital of India, let us pause and pay our respects to one man who did so much for this noble country in her greatest hour of need. Here the Mahatma fell, shot to the heart, at the end of a life struggle for freedom. Millions of people gathered here, paralyzed with grief and shock. The light had gone out, and there was darkness. Here the body of Mahatma Gandhi was consumed by fire in the Hindu custom, and the place remains sacred to every Indian. Nay, indeed, it has become a shrine to which peoples of every nationality come to pay their last respects. This is Delhi old and Delhi today.